Thank you for that tremendous reception, President Ayers, presidents of the BCTD, and to everyone here. First thing foremost, man, welcome to Washington. Two nights ago, we were together to honor Liuna's own Terry O'Sullivan when he was presented with the Yitzhak Rabin Citizenship Award. Terry, I met you in the back, but it was your words during your rousing talk when you talked about solidarity with those who fight for fairness, equality, and justice. For all of us, solidarity is a motivation for action. It is a definition of our cause, and it is that which binds us to everyone in the past, everyone in the future for a common mission. Now, I have to tell you, I'm probably the newest union leader on the block. But let me make one thing clear. Solidarity is my mission on behalf of the players of the National Football League. Let me be clear, the current collective bargaining agreement that we have, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes just briefly, is not just about football players staying together. It's not just about solidarity in a locker room. I'm proud to say that the solidarity that the players have embraced over this past year extends beyond the hash marks of the goalpost. It extends beyond the sidelines of the field. It has to extend beyond 60 minutes of the game and their pregame practice. The message that each and every one of the players of the National Football League have heard over and over and over again this year is that the solidarity that we need to have is one that stretches to the men and women who not only support us as fans, but who rely on these games to provide for their families. The solidarity that we have to have as players has to stretch to every man and woman in this country who work in our stadiums, rely on our games, and work hard for a decent pay for an honest day's work. This is a solidarity that all of you know far too well. The fight of organized labor has been one that has focused on the dignity of being able to provide for one's family. Hard work, good pay, a safe working environment, and the reality that you can actually one day retire comfortably after your toil has ended. All of you know that the solidarity of working men and women is the core of organized labor. And for the players of the National Football League, it has been a sometimes rough message for them to hear. But for the men who only play for about 3.6 years, I have to tell you, when they look at me, they say, "Who's the old guy?" Now, the reality is that most of the players in the National Football League were born sometime after 1980, which simply means that I have shoes older than most of them. But what they have heard over the past year is when it comes to issues like healthcare, workplace safety, job protection, pensions, none of those were ever a gift from management. Nothing. The elements of basic fairness were fought and won, upheld and affirmed on the backs of every man and woman in this country who worked for a living. The players of the National Football League are the recipients of your fight. And for that, I have to say thank you for every union, for every leader on this stage. Because what we have today as players was built upon the backs of each and every job that you work, every piece of leadership that you have done, every fought that you continue to fight, and every strike, lockout that we win. That's what we do because we're organized labor. We fight for the people who get their hands dirty. So it is into that context that now I made the decision that while we have had a good relationship with organized labor in the past, it is my job to make sure that there will be a great relationship with organized labor in our future. The people who are in your locals are neither stars nor celebrities, but all they are men and women who wanted a better life than the life that management keeps telling them that they are lucky to have. Your legacy is the men and women who punch the clock every day, but always demanded justice. It's for that reason that the legacy of organized labor, and I'm proud to say that I have men like Mark Ayers as my friend. I'm proud to say that I've got men like Jimmy Hoffa as my friend. I'm proud to say I've got men like Terry O'Sullivan, Leo Gerard, the men up here as my friend, not because simply, I'm sure you guys are football fans, but because each and every day you lead ordinary men and women in a battle for fairness and justice. And I'll stand shoulder to shoulder with y'all any day of the week. Any day. But I'm especially thrilled that I can look out here right now and see brothers and sisters in our fight that are also fans. So I'm going to depart just a little bit because I always have to ask this question when I'm in a large crowd. Is this an AFC crowd? NFC crowd? Well, y'all are in Washington, so, well, look, I root for them all equally. As you know, I grew up in Washington, D.C., grew up a Redskin fan, but I do root for them all equally. But I'm most proud that this year I can tell you that the players of the National Football League opened our season in Pittsburgh with the Steelworkers. Our players have been on picket lines in Texas and in San Francisco. We're working with locals in New York and Boston and in Philadelphia. Why? Because we know that our fight is your fight. We know that your fight is our fight. And it should come to no surprise to anybody in this room that among the 1,900 current players of the National Football League and the 18,000 former players of the National Football League, those are guys who don't mind a dust-up every now and then. So I will tell you, for the men and women who are on those lines fighting those fights, I promise you, you will always have the men and the families of the National Football League side by side with you. And I'm proud of that. So I get the question often, how does a lawyer from Washington who never played the game end up being the executive director of the National Football League Players Association? And quickly, I always turn to them and I say it's my dazzling 40 speed, the fact that I do have a bench press of 350 and that I'm 6'6". And then once the laughter dies down and I huddle to my little corner. The reality is, most of you know I come from a long line of Baptist preachers. My family grew up in Danville, Virginia. And while my uncles and many people of my family followed my grandfather into the pulpit, there is one other vocation that I will never forget that they all had. Because each and every one of them were sharecroppers in Danville, Virginia, in the Jim Crow South. Each and every one of them grew up from the late 1800s through the 30s, through the 40s, matured during the civil rights era of the 60s in a part of the country that constantly tried to remind people that because of the color of their skin, they were a little bit less. My father is one of 14 children, born to a couple, well, they had 14 kids, born to a couple that believed that even though times were tough, it was their job to provide. So it was my grandfather, Frederick Douglass Smith, who preached two churches well into his 80s, worked and toiled in a field that he didn't own, put his food on his family's table by managing a system that wasn't always fair. He knew that while the planting season curbed his school children's attendance, it did provide food on the table, even if it always didn't provide shoes on their feet. But he also knew that it was his work and their work together that made sure that they could provide for everybody in that family. I know what solidarity is because it runs through my veins. Runs through my veins. And for the men and women of the National Football League, it will be that solidarity that will carry us through. There are some people who like to say that football players are removed from that, but let me tell you a little bit about life in the National Football League. It takes 3 years in the National Football League, 3 years to vest. And if you are lucky enough to vest in the National Football League, you are rewarded with only 5 years of health care. 5 years after you retire. After those 5 years, you are left to yourself to come up with insurance for the myriad of pre-existing conditions that must exist. It is in that National Football League that we now know that the owners have made a decision to lock out players next year in March. Oh, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. As my grandfather would say, I'm on a roll. So into that world, this is the world in which we step as players of the National Football League. 5 years of health care if you're fortunate enough to vest. Unprecedented wealth by each and every owner in this country. According to Forbes magazine, the average football team in the National Football League earned $31 million of profit last year. Each and every team in the National Football League is worth over $1 billion. And last year, the numbers just came in 2 weeks ago, the National Football League turned over $9 billion in total revenue. So you take that economic strength, you take the juggernaut of that economic franchise across the country, and you ask yourself one simple question. Is anybody losing money? Oh, I don't think so. What we know that over the last 15 years, the average team value has increased over 500%. So I have a quick quiz for everybody in the room. Show by either standing up or clapping your hands. Anybody here get a 500% return on their investments over the last 15 years? No. He doesn't have a contract yet. Not yet. Hey, look, you know what? Let me tell you something about Tom Brady. Tom Brady has been in this league for years. He had a reputation, according to some, of not wanting to be involved in what his teammates were doing. He had a reputation, according to the people in the press, well, he is a good-looking guy, that he didn't care. When I drove up to Boston for my first team meeting, and I looked out in that crowd that contained Randy Moss, Matt Light, and Tom Brady, and I said, we need a new group of leaders for the National Football League. The first person to raise his hand was Tom Brady. So right now, Tom Brady's a rep for the National Football League Players Association. All right. Last year, the Miami Dolphins were sold for $1.1 billion. Why is that important? Because in 1994, they were bought for $138 million. So we know that this is not simply a fact of the owners asking for $1 billion back from players because they need help. I haven't heard an owner say, well, D, we're in a situation where, we've run out of the cans of Spam. We've moved over to peanut butter and jelly. We're going to need a couple players to stroke us a check just to get by. I'm waiting for that day. We're asked to believe that the deal is one-sided when I know that most players don't make it to their fourth year. We're told that the deal doesn't make sense for them, even though we now know from the concussion studies that the concussions that these players suffer as a part of their working conditions is causing long-term injury. We're told that the deal can't work when there's no guaranteed contracts. So I'm here to tell everybody that on behalf of the players of the National Football League, we didn't ask for this fight, but I'll stand with the 11 million people of the AFL-CIO. I'll stand with the 600,000 of LIUNA. I'll stand with the building, trade, and construction workers each and every day because I know that your fight is our fight is your fight, and we will stand as one. I promise you that. Promise you that. And you know Tom Brady will stand with me, big boy. So as we fight this fight today, all of you have heard about a man named Bob Batterman. Ever heard of a guy named Bob Batterman? Name familiar a little bit. A man who each and every man and women in working labor knows that a man like Bob Batterman fights unions. A man like Bob Batterman doesn't believe in collective bargaining. Well, America knows a man named Bob Batterman because he was the one that locked out hockey for more than a year during that lockout. The National Football League's lead lawyer for this round of negotiations, I don't have to tell you, Bob Batterman. So the first thing that the National Football League did after they hired him was they went to Fox, they went to CBS, they went to NBC, they went to ESPN, and they secured television rights extending to 2014 to the tune of about $5 billion a year, but they all had one curious clause at the end of those contracts. Each and every one of those contracts guarantees payment to the National Football League even if the games are not played. So look, with all due respect, when they tell me that, D, we're not interested in a lockout, my mom is here and my dad is here, and I can tell you, Mama didn't raise a fool. So it is into that fight that we now stand. It is into that battle that I am prepared to fight. I look to you not only to be our great fans, but also to be our great teammates and our supporters. And it is for that that I will always be proud to be in the House of Labor. Always be proud to be in the House of Labor. So, as I wrap up, I have to tell you, someone always asks me, well, you know, what's this job like? Well, the men up here know what this job is like. There's a tremendous weight on your shoulders. There's responsibility for the families who rely on the leadership and the direction of how we're going to get through this fight. But I will say that it is kind of cool. I kind of dig it. And one day I was sitting on a sideline and someone was interviewing me about the strike and interviewing me about the lockout and interviewing me about the pressures that are going to be on the players this year because of those television contracts. What she did know was that I wasn't really looking at her. I was looking over the shoulder at a quarterback named Drew Brees, who was in town to play the Redskins. He had circled his players up, and many of you have seen the way union leader Drew Brees gets his team ready to play. He's got a little cheer that he leads all of his teammates in, and by the time they reach the end of it, as we know from the way the Super Bowl ended up, God help whoever's on the other side. So it was during that interview that I'd like to leave you right now. We established as players our mantra, our fighting motto for the years that come, and it is one team. We're going to be one team as players. We're going to be one team with our families. We're going to be one team with our fans, but most importantly, we're going to be one team with the men and women who, like us, get their fingers broken, our hands dirty, our backs stretched, and our limits tested. We're going to be one team with organized labor. So if you join me, I'm not really a Drew Brees. Believe me, as my son would say, you're not Drew Brees. Let me leave you with one of the ways that Drew Brees gets his folks fired up. And it's the way that we get together as every man and family member when we get together for a team meeting. I'll say a word, you say one. I'll say a word, you say one. You ready? I don't know. Man, the NFC got you the last time, AFC. Are y'all ready? Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, you ready? Win. B. Fight. Win. Fight. Win. Thank you.